Hey guys, this is John and I hope this video finds you well. I read an interesting article the other day on January 18th, 2020 from CNBC, and the article said that 70% of Americans polled said that they had no more than $1,000 saved in a savings account. Out of those 70%, around 45% said they had little to none, which to me is alarming. And in this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about what tips I've learned to be most effective to saving money, but also offer other things as well, because not everything just revolves around savings. It goes much deeper than that. So here's what I wanted to spend for the next 10 or 15 minutes and hopefully share some information with you that you can find helpful in your own life. If you're tuning in for me for the first time, just a very quick background. In January of 2019, I started with my first YouTube video where I set out on a journey to improve many areas of my life: my health and fitness, finance, relationships, my charitable work, personal development, etc. And I chronicled my journey through videos. Last year, I published around 65 videos showing how I did a really great job, personally speaking, with achieving a lot of goals. I did a wrap-up video at the end of the year of 2019 to show how well I did in comparison to my goal set. I set new goals in 2020, and here I go looking to deal with the same achievement. I find it very therapeutic to do the videos and finding a way to hold myself accountable, and at the same time just hoping to share experiences and maybe help others along the way. So going back to the original topic of savings. First off, I think what's most important is what kind of code of conduct do people set in their own life when it comes to finances? Most of the times, the financial habits we have are initially shaped by our loved ones, our parents, our friends, who maybe grew up in different times, different circumstances, and they maybe gave us the impression that there's a specific path we have to follow as well. Here I talk about, I think my parents grew up in an environment where it was leave high school, find a college where you can get a degree in a job or have a trade that pays well, find a job and last in the job market for 20 to 30 years, saving money along the way and things like a 401k plan so that you have a nice nest egg built and you can live the rest of your happy life in a retirement. This day and age, things have changed so much, both from an industry perspective, the economics and so on. And I'm now 41 years old. I've been working for 20 years now, and I've learned a tremendous amount, mostly in the last few years, especially as I've acquired a higher annual income. So first is the code of conduct. People need to sit down and look at what is their life code of conduct when it comes to money. I've built certain habits over the last few years, which has definitely helped shape my savings strategy, especially as my annual income has grown. As a point of comparison, I graduated college in the year 2000, June of 2000. I was making $48,500 till now, where my last year's annual income exceeded $450K. When I first started working, I had horrible savings. I did participate in a 401k, so I did that piece right, but I spent money on crap, right? I didn't really have a code of conduct. By code of conduct, I mean for every dollar I have coming into my life, what is the strategy I have with where the money goes? So in my example, I have for every dollar coming in, I look to save 20 to 30% and I pay myself first. So I would look to take 20% of that money, 30% of that money, and put it in part of it in a emergency fund, so an emergency account, the rest in a investment account where I look to save money over a period of time, and when that money grows to a particular amount, let's say 75K, 100K, I would look for an opportunity to invest that. Whether that investment is in something like mutual funds or in a dividend growth type of account, like a whole life cash value plan, opening up accounts for my kids, getting involved in the stock market, that kind of thing. And nowadays I'm looking to even get into business ventures where I can invest that money in something like businesses and startups and so on. The other piece of that is, so 20 to 30% goes into paying myself first. I would keep 60%, 65% to my living expenses. These are things like my mortgage, car bills, phone bills, utility, ongoing expenses, entertainment, and so on. I look to then take some money and put it also into what I'll call a personal development bucket. I'll look to put money in a bucket on a monthly basis so that at some point I can invest in something like myself, whether that's a webinar, whether that's buying a course, participating in some kind of conference, right? So bettering myself. And then lastly, I'm also learning more and more how you just can't worry about getting, you need to give. And giving in the form of charitable contributions, your public service, your public civic duty. I'm also now conscious about what I do on an annual basis in terms of giving from a financial perspective. So this is my sort of code of conduct. For every dollar I have coming in, here's how that money is siphoned off and put into different buckets. That is a big and important aspect, because if you're making $50,000 a year and you grow that to $100,000, you may say, oh, well, if I was making more money, I'd save more money. Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, and I think I'm living proof of that, because unless you put in some habits in place early and you do those habits on a consistent basis, you won't be able to keep those habits with the more money you come into contact with. These are sort of our financial code of conduct, as I call it. So people need to first establish that and make sure you're following a sound and effective process, something similar to what I had laid out. Because as well, the more money you make, the easier it is for us to increase our expenses. If you're making more money, you want to afford a bigger house, nicer cars, nicer things. So you're really not making more money because you can't hold on to it. So that's key point number one. Next, I'd like to offer 3 tips, mostly lessons learned I've taken over the last 12 months, where I was able to save in 2019 a little over $110,000. What I did during that journey, and what are 3 tips I found most helpful. First, tip number 1, put your savings strategy on autopilot. This means that with me, I work as an employee for a large company. I get a normal payroll twice a month. Putting my savings on autopilot means instead of me dumping my whole payroll into one savings account and trying to manage that one savings account, I start siphoning off the money through direct deposits. I take some money and put it into a high yield savings account, which I'll ultimately use for investment purposes. I'll put some money into what I'll call my emergency fund account. I'll put some money automatically into an account which I use for everyday expenses. And I also use free apps like Acorns, which takes money automatically from my account on a weekly basis. So every Friday, Acorn I've set up to withdraw $20, $80 a month, which over a 12-month period is over $1,000 or so. And I use that $1,000 for play money at the end of the year to take my family on a nice weekend trip to New York City for Christmas. So my point is I don't have to take the action of seeing a nice healthy paycheck go into my account and then start carving out money here, carving out money there. The human nature of that feels like you're losing that money, you're giving it up. Whereas if the money comes in what I tell it to, and the other money I just don't see because it goes into the accounts I've set it to, you really manage your expenses well, you manage your money well, and you don't feel like you're losing out on that money. So I highly encourage people to set up automation in terms of where that money goes and what accounts they are sent to without you having to do it, or without you having to worry about one huge bucket of money and dealing with managing that accordingly with the different priorities in your life. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, just as important as it is to save money in an autopilot mode, where that money goes is equally important. This day and age, the last year or two, cash has really been taking a hit. Interest rates are almost at historic lows. The yields that banks offer to customers is crap. FDIC published a study and said that I think last year the average large bank retailers offered customers is 0.09%. That's a joke. You're not much better off, or worse off I should say, taking your money, putting it in a shoebox and sticking it under your bed. You're not gaining anything. But there are alternatives to your big box banks like Bank of America, TD Bank, Chase, and something like a high yield savings account with online organizations that are FDIC insured. One example, and who I use, is Synchrony Bank. Synchrony Bank has low operating costs because they don't have brick and mortar banks. The fact that they have low operating costs means they offer a nice yield. Last year, they averaged around 1.8%. This year, they changed it to 1.7%, which is no surprise because interest rates are low, which means the spread on banks is low and the amount of interest they're offering their customers is lower. But the point is 1.7 compared to 0.09 is so much different and so much better. So I invest in those kinds of companies, those kinds of banks to store my money for a period of time. They also pay you interest on a monthly basis. Comparison to a credit union I'm part of, they pay you on a quarterly basis. So you're getting paid every month, 1.7%, not bad. Sure, the trade-off is if I want to use that money, I don't have checks, I don't have an ATM card, I'd have to transfer that money through my normal checking account, which could take a couple of days, but so what, right? The goal here is to store money for a temporary period of time for backup reasons or for emergency reasons, and the high yield savings account is what I found to be very helpful. So tip number one, making sure you put your savings on autopilot. Tip number two, make sure where you put your money and focusing on high yield accounts, some examples like I shared. And tip number three, and this is going to people who are employees, working as employees for large companies that offer savings plans. So 401ks, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, HSAs, etc. I have put all of my cards growing up in a 401k. I'm now in my 20th year of my career, and over that 20 years, I've now amassed a 401k balance of a little over $560,000. I've amassed a retirement account balance with Fidelity equaling around $565,000. Most of that is $530,000 is a 401k. The balance is a rollover IRA where when my wife was working, she had a balance in her 401k. I rolled that, which was around $18,500, into a rollover IRA and invested in Apple and Facebook, and now have grown that to over $35,000. I recently invested in some other blue chip stocks like MasterCard and so on, but that's the balance I have. On paper, that sounds great, right? But if you do the math shows that in retirement, even if you get to a point where you've got $1.5 to $2 million saved, the average lifespan of people in America, I think, is something like 81 years, 80 years old. If I retire at age 60, I have to have enough income to live for 20 years. And 401k, as nice as they are now, are subject to tax laws in 20-something years, which I have no idea what they'll be. I'm required to take minimum distributions on an annual basis. So we definitely don't want to have all your eggs in a 401k basket, because you're going to get paid on the back end. And the back end is so uncertain considering how much debt the country has and the amount of tax law changes that will likely come up. Who knows? So where I'm going with this is you need to find a balance, and I'll go through that in just a moment, but let's not say that 401ks are all bad, right? The point of a 401k is I avoid or I minimize my income level from a federal tax perspective with each dollar I put into a 401k. So I'm avoiding paying federal taxes up front. That money grows tax-free. I have a lot of flexibility in terms of the kind of investments I can do in it. And those are some key benefits. The other key benefit is my company offers a matching program where for every dollar I put in up to 6%, they'll match dollar for dollar, which is huge. So every month, every paycheck, I get paid twice a month, I put in 6%. When in actuality, I'm actually putting in 12% because they match every percent up to that 6%. So I've been maxing out my 401k for the last 2 years, which is nice. On top of that, my company also has a profit sharing program where every April they'll take 3% of your base pay and they'll put it into a profit sharing account. And if you're there 5 years, you're 100% vested in that profit sharing account. November of 2020 is when I'll be at my company 5 years. So that's something I'm looking forward to also. So my point is taking advantage of employer-sponsored retirement is very important. 401k is a very popular choice, but those are pre-tax accounts. You also need to find a balance with doing the same with your savings and retirement planning for post-tax. So this is like the same as if I were to dump money in a high-yield savings account for the next 20 years. Sure, that money is going to grow with very little return of 1.5, 1.7, 1.8%, but it's all cash. It's my cash. I'm not, it doesn't matter what the situation is in the economy. That money's mine. I have that money at the point of whatever tax bracket I'm at, and I could use that later on without fear of what the government is going to do with that. You know what I'm saying? It's where later if I have $1 million, $1.5 million 401k, every dollar I take out, I'm going to be taxed on it based on the tax bracket I'm in at time of retirement, based on whatever the federal tax laws are at that time. It's just a lot of uncertainty. So we need to find a balance. Over the last few years, I've learned I need to start paying much more attention to that balance, where I've now started to place my money in things like a cash value whole life insurance plan, which I'm really using for my daughter, but I'm putting cash in an account like that pays annual dividends. Sure, that's tied mostly to cash, where my 401k and brokerage accounts are tied to the equity markets, which are not an apples to apples comparison. But the point is, it's post-tax dollars. So looking at things like your a Roth IRA, looking at things like a traditional savings account, life insurance plans, whole life insurance plans, healthcare savings accounts. Really do a lot of research to see how you can strike a balance between doing both, because my lesson learned as a guy, again, who's 41, I have a pretty large 401k balance. I'm actually fearful, or I was fearful about a year or two ago, would I really be that comfortable when I retire? Because if you do the math, the answer is not really. You're not as comfortable as you think. That money won't last as long as you think. So I started paying a lot of attention to contributing to both pre and post-tax saving strategies, with the goal of having more flexibility later on. That's the third and final tip. And I really looking to wrap up this video with that note. I hope some of the information I shared was insightful. Maybe you think what I said is unrealistic, or maybe you disagree with me, and for those reasons I'm happy to discuss that further in the chat, so please feel free to leave a comment. If you're interested to hear further content of things similar, I post content on a weekly basis on a broad array of topics, whether those are finance, my health and fitness, my personal development, and I've set a lot of strategies with how I set goals in my life, my experiences with different diets, different spectrum of topics. Feel free to subscribe to the station, click the bell so you can get notified every time I publish a video. Again, my goal is this year to do about 10 or 12 videos every month. So we'll see how that goes. But thank you again, guys, for your attention. I wish you well, and until next time, have a great day. Thanks.